afternoon to you. Welcome to the Weekend at 1. My name is Najma Ismail. Now, the number of casualties following the Al-Shabaab attack in Somalia's El Ede camp a few hours ago is still unknown. The government is, however, expected to give the exact figures of those who perished. Earlier on, Somalia's Foreign Affairs Minister Abdurrahman Duale was to have a press briefing regarding the Friday dawn attacks. Our senior reporter Patrick Amimo was at the Somali embassy and now joins us. Patrick, what happened earlier today?
Thank you so much, Najma. Indeed, the Somali Foreign Affairs Minister Abdurrahman Duale had convened a press conference at 11 this morning. But what happened was that when we got to the Somali embassy, which is in the Hurlingham area, we got a GSU officer was at the gate, had been given instructions that the media briefing had been postponed indefinitely. So there was no clear answer, but the person we got was these are the security person who told us that the media briefing had been suspended indefinitely. We don't know what might have informed this decision by the minister, because the invite had been sent at least an hour earlier to the event. And at this particular conference, we expected the minister to tell us an indication at least on what happened at this particular camp, because there are conflicting reports that about this particular camp, whether it was an SNA camp that was attacked or a KDF camp that was attacked. Because from the statement from the military, it said that it was the KDF soldiers countered the attack that after the Al-Shabaab militants had attacked the SNA camp. So we wanted the minister to, we thought through this news briefing, the minister would have clarified some of the missing links in this particular story. But unfortunately, the minister cancelled the media briefing at the last minute. Najma?
Amimo, we still don't know the number of casualties. Has there been any word? Because the international media is quoting different numbers.
Indeed, it's an interesting scenario in that AMISOM head office has confirmed that, has condemned the attack, and they say that casualties and injuries have been recorded from both sides, both the Al-Shabaab militants and the AMISOM soldiers. But even AMISOM itself has not given the numbers of the casualties, the numbers of those killed or those injured. But it says there was a heavy fighting in that particular that El Ade camp, and both sides suffered casualties and injuries. The same applies to the Kenya Defence Forces. They have acknowledged that there were casualties, but according to the spokesman David Obonyo, Colonel David Obonyo, the last statement he sent last night was that they were still consolidating the figures in order to give us the real numbers on those killed, those who are injured, and the soldiers missing in action. But the Al-Shabaab spokesman has claimed those figures that are being quoted by the foreign news agencies are from the Al-Shabaab spokesman, who's quoted saying that at least 60 KDF soldiers have been killed. These are claims made by the Al-Shabaab militants, and and in these, when it comes to such kind of military exercises and dealing with terrorism, there's bound to be propaganda. So the figures given by the Al-Shabaab spokesman could also be taken with a pinch of salt. They could be not the clear figures, but what we understand was that what we told that is that this particular El Ade camp had about between 300 to 600 Kenyan defense soldiers who are manning this particular camp, and if there was another also SNA army camp nearby which was also attacked. We also yet to get the right figures from the Somali federal government. Though the Somali Minister for Defense, that is General Sheikh Ali Dini, has also condemned the attack and says that attack will not, they'll ensure that despite the attack, the Somali National Army will continue with the AMISOM forces to ensure that Al-Shabaab are defeated and Somalia is back to stability. But also the general has not given the number of casualties on the Somali side. So it's an area that is still the figures are yet to come. But this morning, the Minister for Interior, Major General retired Josephine Kaiseri, was to brief the media in Mombasa on security situation, and we expect maybe on this particular occasion the minister, the cabinet secretary, will take advantage and maybe give us some answers on the number of casualties and the injured following this Friday dawn attack in Gedo region, Somalia. Najma?
Thank you very much, Patrick Amimo, there giving us a brief of what happened in Somalia a few hours ago. Now, the Al-Shabaab have been pushed out of Somalia major cities by the AMISOM and KDF, but they still launch guerrilla attacks across the region. We now move on to Kericho, where our reporter Muremi Mwangi is keeping an eye on the primary on the nominations. Muremi.
Now, and we are here at Tulwet Primary School, a polling station where one of the key contestants in this race for the nomination on is here to cast his vote, and we would want to speak to him. You've been around the county checking on the status of the voting and the entire process. How would you describe it today for Kenyans out there?
I want to appreciate the party headquarters for putting in place a mechanism that seems to be working. The ballot papers arrived yesterday, and they were distributed to the sub-county offices. And early in the morning today, their coordinators and ours converged in that place, that is the sub-county headquarters, and distributed the ballot papers to the various polling stations. But they did do that. In most areas, the voting materials arrived in time, except for a few places. I noted that they didn't arrive until 10 o'clock in some parts of Buret. And I took exception of it because Buret is my stronghold. It is my home constituency, and I didn't know the reason why. I didn't really appreciate the reason that delayed them. Unlike roads in Kipkelion West, where the papers arrived invariably maybe even earlier than they arrived. I mentioned it to the secretariat of the party, and I want to appreciate were in place.
We do apologize for that. Our connection seems to be a bit shaky. Now, the circus that has characterized Mombasa Governor Ali Hassan Joho and Nairobi Senator Mike Sonko's relation played out publicly yet again at as the two almost exchanged blows during President Uhuru Kenyatta's launch of the National Street Lighting Project in Mombasa.
The short-lived show of scorn happened at the beginning of the event when Mombasa Governor snubbed Sonko when he stretched his hand to greet the governor. The Mombasa boss was clearly not in the mood. Something that prompted leaders present to intervene and settle the exchanges that had threatened to get out of hand. What followed was an awkward silence between the two leaders who had to sit next to each other. This is not the first time the two leaders are engaging in such a display of public scorn.
Nyinyi mko na tabia mbaya ya kublackmail president na serikali.
Last week's presidential visit in Likoni, the two traded words before the head of state, something that received much condemnation.
2013 mlikataa kumpa Uhuru kura mkasema mumeibiwa mashamba. Sasa anajaribu kutatua shida la mashamba, mnaleta kasumba mbaya. Nyinyi ni viongozi aina gani ambao msiopenda maendeleo?
Trix Ingado, KTN News, Nairobi.
We move on to Burkina Faso now, where at least 126 hostages have been freed at the Splendor Hotel in Burkina Faso following a siege in which at least 20 people were killed. Gunmen stormed Ouagadougou Hotel and a nearby cafe in an attack involving car bombs. Burkinabe security forces began an assault to reclaim the hotel in the early hours of Saturday. Now, 3 gunmen were killed in the rescue operation involving French special forces. The hotel is frequented by Westerners who may have been the target for the terror group. Let's come back to home issues now. This week, proceedings at the ICC marked the final push by Deputy President William Ruto and Joshua journalist Joshua Arap Sang in their bid to have charges against them dropped. The duo are starting steering. Now, Nina explores what next for Ruto and Sang and what a lack of conviction of the two remaining suspects out of the initial 6 Kenyan could mean for the ICC.
On the 7th of April 2011, Deputy President William Ruto and his co-accused Joshua Arap Sang had their first date at the International Criminal Court following summonses to appear. And when they made their second trip to The Hague in early September 2011 for the 8-day confirmation of charges hearing, more trips would follow after the trial against the two began on the 10th of September 2013. And just like their supporters,
we really hope this is our last travel to the ICC. We not only hope, we believe.
Ruto and Sang are hoping that this will be their last trip to The Hague. The Deputy President has filed a no case to answer motion seeking to have the charges against him dropped, arguing that the prosecution failed to prove any charges against him. But the prosecution, which is this time round focusing on the quantity and not the quality of evidence, is convinced that it has enough evidence to secure a conviction. And this week's proceedings will be decisive. If Trial Chamber 5 rules that Ruto and Sang have no case to answer, they will be off the hook.
There are two things they can do. One to seek revenge, one to seek to sue, but that I think is a long call. Being politician, particularly for the DP, the faster he forgets this thing, the faster he forgives, the better for him, because it makes him free to run his own agenda and run his politics.
But if they lose their bid to have the case dropped, the two will be making more trips to The Hague.
They could also be asked to go on their defense. From where I'm sitting, I suspect they'll be asked to go on their defense and to produce their witnesses. That's the minimum you do to a prosecution side in order for you to ensure justice. You also need to listen to the other side, to the defense side.
There is no telling how long the case would go on, but with the Kenyan general election set for August next year, election campaigns may not be all that Ruto will be handling.
The Deputy President will be having two things to think about: how to be re-elected, or how to have their ticket re-elected, because he's going to run again with the president, and what would happen even in the event that he's re-elected. What would happen in terms of the case. So there will be two worries that he will be bothering about: one, the winning, and the other one, this hanging case around him. Does it affect him negatively? Perhaps not, because we've seen that if it was to affect him negatively, it should have affected him in the last election.
The ICC case was a campaign issue in the 2013 elections, but did not come in the way of Ruto's election agenda. And this time round, things may be no different.
The incumbent government has been in power for 5 years, or no, for 4 years plus, and they will be having their own issues to deal with. There are many issues that the opposition are raising right now that could still be issues around that time, failing to deliver on promises, issues of corruption. There might be other issues. But remember, again, this country does not always hang on issues when it comes to politics. It's what euphoria, what formation, what coalitions are happening, what groups of people are deciding.
If the ICC drops the charges against Ruto and Sang, the Hague-based court will have failed to secure a conviction in the Kenyan case. The case initially had 6 suspects, whom the then ICC prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo sought to have held responsible for the 2007-2008 post-election violence. Judges on the 23rd of January 2012 declined to confirm charges against former Cabinet Minister Henry Koskei and former Police Commissioner Mohammed Hussein Ali. Former Head of Civil Service Francis Mudhaura was off the ICC list on the 18th of March 2013 when the court withdrew the charges against him.
Reasonable doubt at trial.
For President Uhuru Kenyatta, his victory came on the 13th of March last year when the ICC terminated the case against him. The Hague-based court has handled 9 cases in, among other countries, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Sudan, and Libya. It has indicted 39 people and issued warrants of arrest against 31. 9 of them, including Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, are at large as fugitives. If Ruto and Sang are let off the hook, it will mean that the ICC, in its 13-year history, will only have handed down 2 convictions. One against Thomas Lubanga, who is serving a 14-year sentence in the DRC, and Jermaine Katanga, who is serving 12 years in the DRC. Rita Tinina, KTN News.
Now, leader of majority in the Senate, Professor Kithure Kindiki, today led a section of Jubilee allied legislators in castigating opposition leader Raila Odinga for what they call engaging in reckless and malicious campaign to defame senior government officials by linking them to the alleged loss of billions raised through the Eurobond. The Jubilee Brigade argued political office should not be used to maliciously destroy the careers of people. Take a look.
On Thursday, opposition leader Raila Odinga named 8 senior government officials in the National Treasury and Central Bank of Kenya, including the Chief of Staff in the Presidency and Head of Civil Service, Joseph Kinyua, as persons of interest who must explain to Kenyans the whereabouts of 87.7 billion shillings raised through Eurobond that was allegedly wired to the South African branch of JP Morgan and Chase Bank instead of being deposited lump sum and direct into the consolidated fund at Central Bank of Kenya.
There are people who have got information, but they may be just the first line. As you see, you can see an onion. You're peeling it, this first layer, second layer.
A section of lawmakers from the government side, led by leader of majority in the Senate, Professor Kithure Kindiki, have accused Raila Odinga of peddling reckless and malicious allegations on senior government officials.
We are asking all the public officers who were recklessly and maliciously named yesterday to proceed urgently to court, not only to seek damages in terms of personal injury to their character, but to sue the court leader for criminal libel.
The National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich insists all proceeds for the Eurobond were received and accounted for. Rotich says Raila's allegations that the monies were stolen are meant to sabotage the economy. The Central Bank of Kenya has dismissed claims that some of its officials were involved in the alleged embezzlement of Eurobond proceeds. Central Bank of Kenya says Mohamed Nyaoga was appointed chairman of CBK board on June 19, 2015 and did not participate in the Eurobond matter. Nyaoga has promised to institute legal action against Raila. Equally, the head of civil service, Joseph Kinyua, has threatened to sue Raila.
So we are hoping in the next 1 week or 2, we would want to see as many suits as the people who were named yesterday, so that the former Prime Minister can spend 2016 clearing his name or defending himself against those allegations.
That the name of the current chairman of Mohamed Nyaoga of Central Bank of Kenya has been included in the said dossier with ulterior motive. And we challenge the former Prime Minister to give out specifics on the role of Mohamed Nyaoga in the saga, who came to office a month after the Eurobond issue had been finalized.
Indeed, the officers mentioned were in the course of ordinary government business, and he has presented no evidence of misconduct on their part. He is engaged in malicious destruction of the reputations of the public officers.
The Jubilee lawmakers scoffed at Raila's demands to President Uhuru Kenyatta to institute independent international forensic audit to track the whereabouts of the $909 million, an equivalent of 87.7 billion shillings.
It is only in extraordinary circumstances of huge emergency situations that a country cannot bear with that you invite foreigners.
We challenge the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to come out clearly and demonstrate that it was not a party to what is clearly an elaborate money laundering scheme by producing bank statements detailing movements of the Eurobond proceeds deposited in the account between 8th of September 2014 and 30th of June 2015.
JP Morgan, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, then you talk about money laundering. In the same sentence, it means, particularly this time, when global financial institutions are sharply focused to contain financial crime. This is an intention by Raila Odinga to shock and scare global financial players from dealing with Kenya.
The Eurobond debate, it would appear, will not end anytime soon, since the National Assembly's Public Accounts Committee will be investigating beneficiaries of the Eurobond proceeds to determine whether Kenyans got value for the 250 billion shilling controversial bond. Patrick Amimo, KTN News.
Time now for a short break, but don't go too far. I will be back with more news. Welcome back to the Weekend at 1. Now to regional matters. Women and children are once again on the receiving end of the brutality of the government soldiers in the volatile Burundi. The United Nations Human Rights Office has documented cases of Burundi security forces gang raping women during the search for opposition supporters. This comes as a public hearing workshop on Burundi entered its third day at the East African Legislative Assembly, specializing in Arusha, Tanzania. Murimi Mwangi reports.
After over 8 months of violence in Burundi, the United Nations Human Rights Office has released damning revelations of human rights violations, brutality of government soldiers on unarmed civilians. UN Human Rights Chief Zeid Al-Hussein said his office had documented cases of Burundi security forces gang raping women during their hunt for suspected opposition supporters, adding that up to 13 cases of sexual violence in a similar pattern of security forces breaking into victims' houses and separating women before gang raping them had been reported. The UN also says that it had had witness statements of mass graves, evidence that the government may secretly be undertaking mass killing of civilians. The United Nations is also analyzing satellite images to investigate witness reports of at least 9 mass graves in and around Bujumbura, including one in a military camp containing more than 100 bodies in total, all of them reportedly killed on December 11th last year. This development comes as a workshop on Burundi crisis entered its 4th day at the East African Legislative Assembly, special sitting in Arusha, Tanzania.
There's been an unlawful and violent response of the security forces, essentially the police, to protests and demonstrations by citizens of Burundi right from April of 2015 last year.
During the session, fresh reports of extrajudicial killings were reported, a pointer to the growing crisis that began in April last year after President Pierre Nkurunziza announced plans to contest a 3rd term in office.
We have had reports of incitement by senior government officials and hate speech by senior government officials, and this, amongst other things, is what motivated the latest mission to Burundi by the African Commission for Human and People's Rights. A lot of this, as you can see, we are asserting are being undertaken by the government, violating the rights of the citizens being undertaken by the government, by the ministers, by the police, and also by a youth group, or in other words, a militia associated with the current ruling party in Burundi, the CNDD-FDD, which is called the Imbonerakure.
The workshop was convened following the release of a petition by Pan-African Lawyers Union on November 25th last year, demanding for more regional intervention to end the Burundi crisis. The UN says at least 439 people have been killed and another 200,000 displaced. Muremi Mwangi, KTN News, Nairobi.
Thank you very much for watching The Weekend at 1. My name is Najma Ismail. At the top of the hour, we will be bringing you more More news.